"Bite him, now." The command was given. The K9 dog launched like a missile, locked onto Jack Miller. Bared fangs. Piercing eyes. The distance closed. 5 meters. 3 meters. 1 meter. It had stopped. No bite. No bark. It stared at Miller. Then slowly, it lay down at his feet. Dalton's eyes widened in disbelief. No way. The crowd held their breath. He had picked the wrong man to mess with. And his dog knew it before he did. Jack Miller adjusted his ceremonial fur hat, feeling the familiar weight that had been a part of his identity for the past 4 years as a royal guard. The crisp autumn air cut through the morning, but he remained perfectly still, his dark hands gripping the rifle tightly. 25 years in the military had taught him that silence was a form of power. Tourists drifted past him, the sound of cameras clicking incessantly. A young black girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at him. "Mom, he looks like us," she said. The mother smiled, her eyes filled with pride. Miller's face remained as impassive as ever, but a warmth spread through his chest. When he had first earned a position in the Queen's Guard, moments like these had become his quiet reward. His mind briefly wandered to Kandahar, where he had led the K9 unit for the Special Forces. The desert heat, a stark contrast to the perpetual dampness of London, had honed his ability to read both people and animals. His team had nicknamed him the Whisperer for his strange ability to calm even the most aggressive military dogs. A sound near the palace gate broke his reverie. His years of combat training had sharpened his senses. A shift in the atmosphere, an unmistakable tension filled the air. He knew to trust his instincts, the very instincts that had saved him in life-or-death situations in Afghanistan. He spotted a man pushing through the crowd of tourists, his German shepherd moving aggressively, clearly an animal untrained. Miller immediately recognized the signs: the dog's fur bristling, its unstable gait, the leash pulled tight in the owner's hand. A dangerous combination. The man's face was flushed, not from the morning chill, but from something deeper. Miller had seen that expression before, in the pubs of Belfast after long, arduous missions in London, from the eyes of those who looked at his skin before ever noticing the uniform. Though Miller's face remained neutral, tension built in his chest. Beneath his ceremonial uniform, he carried the pride of the military as armor, his distinguished service order earned for saving his team in an ambush, countless hours spent training elite K9 teams that had saved hundreds, and the quiet respect from both his colleagues and superiors. A child's cry pierced the air, signaling the man's approach. The growl of the German shepherd grew louder, and the owner muttered curses lost in the wind. Miller stood motionless, but his mind rapidly calculated combat scenarios. The crowd was thickening, meaning civilians could easily find themselves in the line of fire if things escalated. His ceremonial rifle, impressive as it looked, was unloaded by royal regulation. Still, Miller had long learned that weapons weren't always the answer. Sometimes, strength lay in stillness, in the firm belief of knowing exactly who you were and what you could do. The man was now less than 6 meters away. His face twisted with hatred, not towards Miller's uniform, but towards what he perceived beneath it. The leash on the German shepherd was taut, the owner's knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Jack Miller inhaled deeply, the kind of breath he had perfected before every military operation. The sunlight glinted off his uniform's buttons, reflecting in sharp, bright flashes. In them, he saw not just a guard, but a witness to every barrier he had broken to stand here today. Whatever happened next, he was ready. Chris Dalton yanked the leash of the German shepherd, his fury mounting with every step towards the palace gate. The dog, only a year old, untrained and feeling its owner's frustration, responded with frantic energy. Its ears pinned flat against its head, caught between natural aggression and unease. "Look at this nonsense," Dalton shouted, loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Now anyone can wear this uniform." Dalton's other hand clenched a half-empty beer can, the stench of early morning alcohol amplifying the resentment that oozed from him. His German shepherd whimpered, sensing the toxic mix of liquor and rage. A group of American tourists shifted uncomfortably, lowering their cameras as Dalton's voice grew louder. A middle-aged woman in a red coat pulled her children closer, recognizing the dangerous combination of an aggressive dog and an intoxicated owner. The German Shepherd's claws clattered against the cobblestone, its gait becoming increasingly erratic. Dalton had taken in the dog 6 months ago, telling his friends it was for protection, but its training consisted mostly of YouTube videos and drunkenly barked commands. The animal's noble potential had been warped by Dalton's own incompetence. Morning sunlight cast long shadows over the palace gates as Dalton shoved through the crowd, bloodshot eyes locked onto Miller's rigid stance in his ceremonial uniform, a sight Dalton believed was robbing men like him of everything. 3 job rejections in the past month had stoked his fury into a blaze. "Hey, you're standing in the wrong place," Dalton shouted, deliberately stepping past the tourist boundary. The German Shepherd's leash went taut, its body stiffening. "You don't belong here." His voice was slurred, thick with alcohol, laced with deep-seated bitterness. The tourists around him began filming, sensing the tension crackling in the air. The dog picked up on the shift, feeding off the instability, unable to remain calm under the strain. Dalton tightened his grip on the leash until his knuckles turned white. A Pakistani family hurried away. The father placed himself between Dalton and his children while the mother whispered something into her child's ear, her gaze darting between the agitated dog and the immobile guard. Dalton noticed their retreat and scoffed, emboldened by what he mistook for fear. "This is what's wrong with England now," he said to no one in particular, taking another swig of beer. The dog's whimpering ceased, replaced by a low growl that mirrored its owner's anger. "They're taking our jobs, our places, this whole damn." His words cut off as the dog lunged forward, testing the leash's limits. Dalton stumbled, his alcohol-dulled reflexes betraying him. The animal's body shifted from anxious to aggressive, its instincts overridden by the violence it had been conditioned to obey. The crisp morning air thickened with tension as Dalton regained his balance, a dangerous grin curling his lips. He glanced down at the straining dog, then back at the unmoving guard. A decision formed in his intoxicated mind, one that would change both of their lives forever. The tension reached its breaking point as Dalton spewed a barrage of slurs, each word heavier than the last. Miller's silence seemed to enrage him further, like a bull facing an unshaken matador. The crowd had swelled, phones capturing every hateful word. "You think you're something special in that uniform?" Dalton sneered, his face contorted with fury, spittle flying from his lips. "My grandfather died protecting this palace in the war, and now they've got people like you guarding it." The German Shepherd's growl deepened, vibrating through the morning air, feeding off its owner's hatred. A mother hurriedly pulled her child away, abandoning a half-eaten ice cream on the pavement. An elderly man in a veteran's cap stepped forward, his weathered face flushed with anger, but his wife grabbed his arm, whispering, "Don't, Henry. He's got that dog." Miller could read the danger in the animal's posture. It was preparing to strike, tail rigid, teeth bared, muscles coiled. Years of combat training had taught him how to recognize the smallest shifts in movement. But palace regulations demanded absolute stillness unless a direct threat to life emerged. Each passing second felt like a blade pressed against his skin. Dalton edged closer, deliberately invading restricted space. "Not gonna say anything? Cat got your tongue?" He yanked the leash, agitating the dog further. "Maybe they don't teach your kind proper English." 2 guards in the distance noticed the confrontation and moved briskly toward them, but protocol prevented them from abandoning their posts unless an immediate threat was present. Miller knew help was only minutes away, minutes he might not have. The dog's barking shattered the morning calm, its echo bouncing off the palace walls, drawing even more attention. Tour buses slowed, cameras flashed, and social media live streams captured the unfolding spectacle. Dalton, reveling in the attention, stood taller, his alcohol-fueled bravado growing stronger by the second. "This dog doesn't like people like you either," Dalton sneered, tightening the leash. The dog, though poorly trained, had learned to associate this tension with the command to attack. Its ears flattened, and its body crouched into an attack stance. Miller felt the shift in the air. He'd seen this posture countless times in Afghanistan, dogs ready to lunge. His body tensed, instinctively ready to respond. The years of canine training had ingrained every subtle cue the dog might give. The crowd grew in size, their breath collectively held. Someone shouted for the police, and a palace guard radioed for backup, but Dalton didn't hear any of it. He was consumed by hatred, a force that had controlled his life, and now his dog's training. The morning light glinted off Miller's medals, shimmering like a testament to his dedication. Dalton's gaze fixed on them, his face twisted with rage at the sight of those achievements. His grip on the leash tightened, his knuckles white with lethal intent. "Let's see how well." "That uniform protects you," Dalton hissed, making his decision. The shepherd sensed the change, its muscles tensing, preparing for the strike. The tension in the air was palpable, a taut string ready to snap. "Run!" Dalton's cold command cut through the air as he released the leash. The shepherd lunged toward Miller, its legs stretching with powerful force. Time seemed to slow, every millisecond crystallizing into battle readiness. Miller's mind briefly flashed to Kandahar, recalling similar situations, but with much higher stakes. His muscles remembered the hours of training with military dogs, understanding their language, reading their intent. The crowd of tourists gasped in unison, their phones raised, anticipating what they thought would be a tragedy. The dog soared through the air, its mouth aiming for Miller's throat, but something shifted mid-flight. Its ears flicked, its nose sensing a signal that its owner couldn't perceive. The 25 years of canine experience had left a profound imprint on Miller. A particular pheromone, one that trained dogs could instinctively detect. Dalton's victorious grin faltered as the dog's attack stance shifted. Its training, though aggressive, was amateur compared to the precision of military training. Its natural instincts began to override Dalton's crude commands. Miller remained still. His eyes locked onto the dog's as it flew past him. This was a technique he'd used countless times in Afghanistan, asserting dominance without violence. The dog looked into Miller's eyes, its pupils dilating, recognizing the superior trainer. The crowd stood in stunned silence as the dog altered its course, no longer attacking, its aggression giving way to hesitation. Years of canine training had taught Miller that most dogs, even those poorly trained, could sense true authority. Dalton's face twisted in disbelief as the dog landed 3 steps from Miller, its attack posture dissipating. The dog's nose began to work, processing complex signals from the soldier, signals shaped by hours of training and trust forged in combat zones. "What are you waiting for?" Dalton screamed, his voice cracking. "Attack!" But the dog's ears flicked lightly, then turned away, sensing the difference between a training command and the rage of a drunk owner. Miller stood firm, his presence filling the space with a quiet power. The dog sat, then lay down, its actions a clear reprimand to Dalton's hatred. The military discipline ingrained in Miller had prepared him for this very moment. Palace security was closing in, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, but the true battle had ended the moment the connection between trainer and confused dog had been established. The dog's tail began to wag gently, responding to Miller's calm authority. Dalton stood frozen, his weapon of hatred now an evidence of Miller's expertise. The morning light illuminated the scene. A palace guard standing like a statue, and a German shepherd choosing respect over the hatred it had been trained with. The crowd, still silent in shock, broke the stillness with applause. Cameras captured the moment. A military canine trainer had defeated hatred without a single muscle moving. The dog looked up at Miller, its eyes now filled with a new awareness, while Dalton's world collapsed around him. Miller spoke, his voice cutting through the air with military precision. The word, "sit," in German rang out, carrying the weight of years of canine training. The dog, still unsure in its actions, immediately obeyed the professional command. Dalton staggered back, his drunken mind struggling to comprehend how the weapon of hatred he had wielded had now turned against him. The dog lay down, its body shifting from an aggressive posture to one of submission within mere seconds. Beside, Miller's voice rang out, carrying the quiet authority that had trained elite military dogs in war zones. The dog crawled forward, tail wagging lightly, recognizing a true master in its own language. The crowd captured every moment on video as the dog adjusted its position, standing perfectly at Miller's left foot in the ideal stance of military K9 training. Palace security arrived, witnessing the shepherd dog and Dalton, who had transformed from adversary to obedient soldier. Miller, with 8 years of experience in the K9 Special Forces, finally spoke. His voice resonated through the stunned crowd. His dog recognized what he couldn't see through his own hatred. A professional trainer, who had trained some of the world's finest military dogs, the shepherd's eyes never left Miller's despite Dalton's increasingly desperate commands. The bond between trainer and dog, though brief, transcended months of brutal training. "But that's my dog," Dalton protested weakly, his previous confidence evaporating. City police officers advanced from behind, unnoticed by the man obsessed with his own rage. "A dog trained for hatred will always bow to a dog trained with purpose," Miller responded, holding his ceremonial posture. The shepherd stood firm, instantly transforming from weapon to protector. The morning light illuminated the scene. A royal guard in ceremonial uniform, a German shepherd standing at attention, and a defeated attacker facing the consequences of his actions. Young tourists immediately uploaded the video online, and the incident spread quickly. 2 officers restrained Dalton's arms while another read him his rights. The shepherd remained steady at Miller's side, embodying the difference between trained respect and forced hatred. "This dog will need recovery," Miller informed the present K9 officers. "But it has great potential. Poor training, but basic intelligence is strong." His analysis carried the weight of decades of experience. The final image captured by numerous phones showed Dalton being escorted in handcuffs, while his former weapon of hatred sat quietly beside the very guard he had intended to attack. The morning light reflected on Miller's medal, a testament to excellence that had turned hatred into respect without a single act of violence. "You served with us in Kandahar, didn't you?" a city police officer asked Miller, maintaining a professional distance. Other officers worked to move the crowd back, forming a protective circle around the palace gates. Miller, finally released from his ceremonial stance, stood in respectful repose. The K9 Special Forces team, 2010 to 2017, had trained over 35 dogs for military operations. The German shepherd still sat beside him, transformed from weapon to protector. The officer nodded in recognition. "Wait, Captain Miller. The one who saved the entire village from an IED field with just 2 dogs." The officer's tone shifted from professional inquiry to admiration. "3 dogs," Miller corrected softly. "Lost one that day, saved 50 civilians." His hand instinctively brushed against his distinguished service medal. The shepherd sensed his fleeting sadness and moved closer. Flashbulbs continued to go off as reporters arrived, drawn by the viral videos. "Racist ATD by Co DVTRN" flashed across the digital display of a news van. Dalton sat in the police car, pale, watching his dog respond to Miller's subtle commands. The K9 officers on the scene confirmed what Miller already knew: the dog would recover, and its natural intelligence would overcome months of improper training. "We'll need your statement, Captain," the lead investigator said, but someone wanted to speak with him first. He gestured toward a palace aide hurrying across the courtyard, bearing an official letter. What had begun as a simple act of hate had transformed into something greater. The videos revealed a decorated military hero and a royal guard defeating prejudice, not with force, but with the expertise that the attacker had refused to acknowledge. "The palace wishes to commend your actions," the aide announced, handing Miller an envelope with a seal. "The Queen has taken a special interest in how you handled this situation." The shepherd's tail wagged slightly, as if understanding the significance. Miller took the envelope with practiced formality, knowing that his response to hatred had honored not just the crown, but the values it represented. At the city police station, Dalton sat hunched in the interrogation room, his arrogance replaced by a cold, calculating composure. The investigator placed a laptop in front of him, displaying a compilation of videos captured by dozens of tourists' phones. "Do you know who you tried to assault today?" Detective Samantha Walker asked, her voice calm but firm. She presented the photos, Miller in Afghanistan, receiving the Distinguished Service Medal, training elite K-9 units. Captain Jack Miller, the recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, had saved 50 civilians in Kandahar and trained over 35 military dogs for special forces operations. Each of his accomplishments struck hard against Dalton's prejudices. As the first Black Royal Guard to receive personal recognition for this achievement, the reality shattered the racial wall Dalton had built. The fluorescent lights in the holding room cast long shadows across Dalton's face as the truth dawned on him. His entire worldview, constructed from bias and propaganda, collapsed under the weight of Miller's accomplishments. His dog, Walker continued, is being assessed by Captain Miller's former colleagues at the old K-9 unit. The initial evaluation indicates it was trained aggressively over several months. She paused, letting the implication sink in. This could lead to additional charges for animal cruelty. Outside the police station, news crews had gathered. The story had exploded online. Heroic soldier halts racist attack with military expertise. Royal Special Forces Guard fends off racial assault. Veteran turns hate into a lesson. The young black girl who had witnessed the incident gained attention too, with her mother sharing a video, declaring, "When I grow up, I want to be like him. Strong without being cruel. Brave without being angry." Meanwhile, Miller's commendation letters were circulating through military channels. His former commander in Afghanistan called the palace, sharing more stories of Miller's service, lives saved, missions completed, and barriers broken. The German Shepherd, now named Noble at the Rehabilitation Center, was progressing quickly under active training. The K-9 trainer remarked, "It's like the dog had been waiting for real guidance." A single meeting with Captain Miller broke months of negative training. Dalton's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends and family who had watched the video and were disgusted. "You attacked a war hero just because of his skin color," his sister texted. "Mom's crying, don't come home for Sunday dinner." As night fell over London, Dalton faced the consequences of his actions in the holding cell. Meanwhile, Miller's story inspired thousands. The incident became a case study in police and military training centers. How excellence can overcome prejudice, how control can defeat chaos, how dignity can paralyze hatred. The next morning, London newspapers reported, Royal Special Forces veteran halts racial attack with a single command. The viral videos garnered millions of views overnight, sparking a nationwide discussion on racism, service, and redemption. Dalton appeared in court, facing multiple charges: racial harassment, assault, inciting racial hatred, and animal cruelty. His defense lawyer grimaced as the prosecutor presented the overwhelming video evidence and Miller's distinguished service record. The head of the rehabilitation center confirmed that the German Shepherd, now called Noble, had made rapid progress under positive training. Captain Miller had even participated in his off hours to help the dog become a PTSD service animal for veterans. A member of parliament cited the case in a debate about strengthening hate crime laws. A legislator noted, "When hate meets excellence, excellence wins, not through force, but through expertise and dignity." Miller received hundreds of letters from across the world. Veterans shared similar experiences. Parents requested he speak at schools. Young black children sent drawings of him in uniform, standing strong in the face of hate. The palace hosted a private ceremony where Miller received special recognition for his outstanding achievements above and beyond duty. The young black girl, who had first pointed to him and told her mother, was invited to attend. Her dream of serving now burned brighter than ever. Dalton was sentenced to 20 months in prison, along with mandatory diversity training. He wrote a public apology, "I saw the uniform but didn't see the man. Captain Miller has shown me the ignorance of my hate." The incident became a lesson at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, teaching future officers how discipline, expertise, and dignity can overcome prejudice. Miller's example proved that true strength does not lie in the ability to harm, but in the power to transform hatred into understanding. The moment the K-9 dog bowed instead of attacked, the battle was already over. Not a fight of fists or weapons, but a battle of expertise versus ignorance, discipline versus recklessness, experience versus blind hate. Chris Dalton had unleashed his anger, expecting the law of dominance to prevail. He had put his faith in force, in fear, in intimidation. But in the face of true mastery, his weapon of hatred crumbled into obedience. The crowd stood frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. What had just happened defied instinct, defied expectation. How could a trained attack dog refuse its owner? Could it surrender to a man who never even flinched? Because real power isn't about aggression. It's about control. Jack Miller had faced greater dangers before. He had trained K-9 units in war zones where a single mistake meant death. He understood fear better than anyone, but he never let it control him. Dalton made one fatal miscalculation. He thought power came from control over others. Miller knew better. True power comes from control over yourself. And now the world saw it too. As the police led Dalton away in handcuffs, the K-9 remained at Miller's side, no longer an instrument of hate, but a testament to the difference between training and manipulation, between fear and respect. This was no longer just an incident. It was a lesson, a story that would be told and retold. Because fear always wins, unless you know how to control it. If this moment shook you, imagine the countless stories just like it, stories of defiance, of quiet strength, of power earned, not taken. There's more to uncover. More stories where fear meets its match. Where discipline triumphs, where experience exposes ignorance, where history is rewritten by those who refuse to bow. If this story made you think, then stay. Because what's coming next might just change the way you see the world. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.